let's jump back into to 1 Timothy. We left off in verse 7 last Sunday morning. So what we'll do is we'll back up. We'll read 6 and 7 again, and then we'll talk a little bit about 7, and then hopefully we'll finish up this kind of first section around doctrine and finish up verses 8 through 11 this morning. I do have quite a bit of text for us to look at, this morning, especially as we get over into verses 8 and 9. So we'll hopefully can get through that. All right. So starting at verse 6, and it says, from which, let's back up. Let's read 5.
Where again?
1 Timothy, chapter 1. 1 Timothy 1, yep, verse 5. So now the purpose of the commandment is love from a pure heart, from a good conscience, from sincere faith, from which some, having strayed, have turned aside to idle talk, desiring to be teachers of the law, understanding neither what they say nor the things which they affirm. So we had talked last week about, who we believe to be, the Judaizers that were trying to teach this law, and they kind of had it all messed up. They were trying to use parts of the Mosaic law with parts of Christianity, and it was confusing, right? And I think where we left off, we were talking about they were using enforcing some of the Levitical laws of the Old Testament. They were still trying to bind those on those in the new church. And I think we stopped right when we were going to talk about circumcision. So let's flip over to Acts chapter 15 real quick. Acts 15, and let's look at verses 1 through 11. And we're going to read here about conflict over circumcision, right? And this will give us a little bit of context around some of the Levitical laws that were trying to be, enforced, specifically here in Ephesus where we're talking about. Who wants to read 1 through 11? Any takers?
Certain men came down from Judea and taught the brethren, unless you are circumcised according to the custom of Moses, you cannot be saved. Therefore, when Paul and Barnabas had no small dissension and dispute with them, they determined that Paul and Barnabas and certain others of them should go up to Jerusalem to the apostles and elders about this question. So being sent on their way by the church, they passed through Phoenicia and Samaria, describing the conversion of the Gentiles, and they caused great joy to all the brethren. And when they had come to Jerusalem, they were received by the church and the apostles and the elders, and they reported all things that God had done with them. But some of the sect of the Pharisees who believed rose up, saying, it is necessary to circumcise them and to command them to keep the law of Moses. Now the apostles and elders came together to consider this matter. And when there had been much dispute, Peter rose up and said to them, men and brethren, you know that a good while ago God chose among us that by my mouth the Gentiles should hear the word of the gospel and believe. So God, who knows the heart, acknowledged them by giving them the Holy Spirit, just as he did to us, and made no distinction between us and them, purifying hearts by faith. Now therefore, why do you test God by putting a yoke on the neck of the disciples, which neither our fathers nor we were able to bear? But we believe that through the grace of the Lord Jesus Christ, we shall be saved in the same manner as they.
Perfect. Thank you, Tony. So, a similar dispute, right, where we've got parts of the old law, the Mosaic law, that are trying to be bound and combined, and really that yoke forced on people, and it was no longer relevant, right? We're going to get into a little bit later today when we get down into verse, I think it's 11, We're going to talk a little bit, about the glorious gospel, and what that gospel is, and how it's so different than the Mosaic law, and how really it frees us from that Mosaic law. So they had been freed from the circumcision, but it was still a point of contention, in the church, specifically there in Ephesus. So I think we talked last week when we were reading this. In verse 6, it said that they had strayed, or some translations say swerved, which would indicate that at some point these people were on the correct path. They were on the right path, but they had wandered away. They wanted to be teachers of the old law, but they were inconsistent. And again, their messaging was confusing, and they really did not know what they were saying. So the law in itself did serve a purpose. It served a purpose then. It certainly serves a purpose for us now, but it's a different purpose than what it served before the law of Christ came into effect. Let's look real quick at Ephesians 2. Ephesians 2, verses 14 and 15. I think the heat finally kicked off. So, in full disclosure, I did have my gas fireplace on this morning. It was cold at the house, but it certainly wasn't cold in here this morning. So Ephesians 2, 14 and 15, it says, "For he himself is our peace, who has made us both one, and who has broken down in his flesh the dividing wall of hostility, by abolishing the law of commandments expressed in ordinances, that he might create in himself one new man in place of the two, so making peace, and might reconcile us both to God in one body through the cross, thereby killing the hostility." So we can see in that there in Ephesians 2, 14 and 15, that Christ abolished that law of commandments. Those ordinances that were in place in the old law and the Mosaic law that many of these folks in Ephesus were clinging to were dead, in essence. We talked a little bit previously about doctrine and how important, doctrine is, right? And that is, really the key of this text, of this letter. It's really twofold. One, it's an encouragement to Timothy, and second, it's a reinforcement around, doctrine and, the way we should conduct ourselves in worship. I want to take a look real quick at an example of the importance of doctrine. And let's look at Matthew chapter 7. And we're going to look at verses 21 through 27. Because I think we all know we live in a society, in a part of our history where folks tend to tell you if something feels right to you, then it's okay. Despite what God's word says, what we can read in the scripture that's inspired, it probably doesn't mean what it says it means. We're told that consistently, right? And what we read in Matthew 7, starting in verse 21, says, "Not everyone who says to me, 'Lord, Lord,' shall enter the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of my Father in heaven. Many will say to me in that day, 'Lord, Lord, have we not prophesied in your name, cast out demons in your name, and done many wonders in your name?' And then I will declare to them, 'I never knew you. Depart from me, you who practice lawlessness.'" So we can conclude from that there were people that were working for the Lord. They were doing or will be doing what they considered to be sound doctrine. But we're told, very clearly that not everyone who says these things or does these things in my name is going to be doing the right things. So obviously there is a correct way and an incorrect way when it comes to our approach to doctrine. Turning aside from the plan and the desires of God is certainly not fruitful. We'll talk in a little bit about some of the some controversial topics that are oftentimes excluded today, and maybe so even in some of the the churches of Christ, that might be offensive to people, that might be in direct opposition to what is considered normal in our society today. But it is just as it was Timothy's charge and Timothy's job to preach and teach against that in Ephesus, and Paul's job throughout the entire New Testament. That's certainly still our job today. And I think it was in Mark Taylor's class a couple Wednesday nights ago. He was talking about our duty as a Christian, and sometimes that line is blurry in our normal day-to-day life, whether it be at our job, at your big corporate job that has, you're part of a corporation that supports alternative lifestyles that are contradictory to God's word. And then, us as Christians, we still have a duty to uphold the truth that's found in the Bible, right? So, where do you draw the line between choosing to provide for your family and then upholding the truth in God's word? And that's a tough challenge. It certainly is for me, in the position that I'm in with the company that I'm at. There are certainly things that we endorse and openly support as a corporation that don't align with my personal values. Jason shared the same thing with me a couple weeks ago. We were talking about it, and where he works, they have an ally program, and he's like, I keep getting encouraged. You need to sign up for the ally program and be an ally. And he's like, I do my best to just ignore it, right? Because if you speak out against something, openly, there could be ramifications, on your employment, right? And again, what are we willing to give up, sacrifice, in order to make sure that we're upholding this charge, that Timothy had? Any questions or comments on that? Am I the only one that experiences that in my work? Do other people see that too?
No, I think how you handle it is if they made a mandate where, hey, you have to sign up this or you lose your job, then you'd have to lose your job.
Yeah.
There's even a movement now politically regarding abortion that it's disturbing. That's coming from the conservative side, that they're worried that they're going to lose the upcoming elections because they're so against abortion. Like even South Carolina passed a law that if a woman has an abortion, gets the death penalty. So they're saying that we're going to lose these elections because we're so against abortion. But the Bible teaches us that we need to obey God rather than man.
Right.
And we don't. It's not our duty to try to even that or smooth that over. We got to follow what God tells us to do.
Yeah.
So you could be a part of something, or in a corporation setting, but if people around you know that you're not doing that, and if they made a mandate, that's when you have to choose that.
Yeah.
I think too, there's one thing of going against the grain, but there's another that once we're approached, I don't think we have a choice, but to stand the ground, right? Because if we cower away, then what are we representing? Are we really the light? So as a facilities manager, my GM's come to me recently. We have a couple of single restrooms. and they're gonna have to turn them into gender neutral. So I, at that time, let her know my position, and thankfully, she feels the same, so they'll just be unisex restrooms, but we're still keeping male and female in the major restrooms in the building, and since they're just single use, so I just think that we do have to stand our ground, or we'll just continue to lose that ground.
Yeah. I think you're spot on, Tony. If you're able to coexist and, we're able to still follow, God's word and the way we live our lives and the way we represent ourselves. And if we're ever put in a situation where we have to choose, I think the choice is clear, right? And I think you could look at it, it's really no different than, being in an environment, where social drinking is considered, okay, right? So I've been traveling for my job for like the last 8 weeks off and on, leave again in the morning actually to go to South Carolina. And it's not uncommon at nighttime, hey, let's, get a group of folks and go out to dinner, right? And, everybody's ordering beer or, wine. And, Nick, what do you want to drink? Take an ice water with lemon. Oh, you're not drinking tonight? No, I don't drink. Oh, I didn't know that. Why do you not drink? And you explain to them, why. And they're like, oh, okay, I respect that. So it's no different than that, right? When because that's considered, socially acceptable. Many of these things that we're going to talk about in a couple of verses here are also considered, socially acceptable. So, it's certainly our duty to distance ourselves from those things. And then if put in a situation where we have to stand up and make a choice, then do so. All right, so let's continue on into verse 8. And we're going to talk about really the proper scope of the law. So we've talked about, how they've kind of distorted the old law, combined it with the law of Christ. So let's read 8 through 11. Would anybody like to read 8 through 11?
Go ahead.
Thank you, Rich.
Now we know that the law is good if one uses it lawfully, understanding that the law is not laid down for the just, but for the lawless and disobedient, for the ungodly and sinners, for the unholy and profane, for those who strike their fathers and mothers, for murderers, sexually immoral, men who practice homosexuality, enslavers, liars, perjurers, and whatever else is contrary to sound doctrine, in accordance with the gospel of the glory of the blessed God, with which I have been entrusted.
Thank you. So there's quite a bit for us to cover off in these 3 verses, and I think we'll probably spend the rest of our time going through these. So as I mentioned a few minutes ago, the Old Testament is certainly good for us, and it has profound importance to us as New Testament Christians. And we talked previously, not everybody in Ephesus fully understood that old law was abolished with Christ. What are some ways that the Old Testament is good for us today in the year 2023, even though we're not bound to that law? What are some ways that it's fruitful for us in our current lives?
There is tremendous wisdom for living in the Old Testament.
Yeah.
While we are not bound to Mosaic law as it relates to sacrifices, worship, and so forth, we are told in the New Testament to not to be murderers, not to be liars, not to be drunks, not to be fornicators. We're told that in the New Testament. The wisdom of the Old Testament is our guidelines for living.
I'd agree with that.
It's where we go for the explanation, for the question.
Also, to kind of go on with what Paul's saying, is, you know, the lives in which the Christians in the Old Testament live, right, versus the world itself at that time. There's a lot of bad things going on in the world at that time, right? You know, they were being persecuted, killed, you know, anything and everything that they could do to stop this movement. When we fast forward 2023, I mean, it's tough. You know, so we can take a look at the faith that those individuals had, and the strength and the confidence and the courage that they had to move forward with what they believed in. And we need to be careful because, you know, a little bit of persecution, do we stand up like you guys were talking about, or do we run? Do we hide?
Yep.
And then another part of that is see, you know, the nation of Israel, they keep falling back into the temptations of the world, things of the world. So there's standing your ground, there's running away from it, there's, you know, giving in to the world.
Nick, we should, the old law provides our foundation for understanding the new law. It's, and by that, then you have the better application of the new law into your lives. Just what we've been teaching, some of the verses you spoke about there, you need to understand where it differs and how the new law came about, and otherwise people apply it incorrectly.
Yep.
And some of the stuff you've been teaching over here. So if you, as we all are New Testament Christians, you need to study the Old Law to better understand the New Law.
I mean, we're not that dissimilar today as the church in Ephesus. There are people maybe not in the Church of Christ body, you know, globally, but certainly people in denominations that still think, you know, the old law is binding, right? And they're practicing, you know, parts of the old law, you know, parts of, you know, the new law. And, you know, there's certainly people that don't understand, you know, that divide between the two. Yes, Marcy?
It also shows us the relationship with God's people and with God. That what expectations he had of his people and how the love that he expressed and showed those people so that we can use that as an example.
Yeah.
To go with what Marcy's saying, you also, what I think is important that relates to us is God has limitations. People go, especially in the church, we see all these things that are added to or taken away from, and people think, well, it's going to be, God's not going to care. And then you can go right to the Old Testament and read example after example where God has limitations.
He dealt harshly with.
Dealt harshly, and thus he's going to deal harshly with us
Yeah.
when it comes that time.
Yeah.
And how much more is he going to put up with?
Yeah. You know, I think we get caught up in, you know, in the what I would call the New Testament, you know, Christianity of, you know, everything is love and God is love and Christ is love, which is so true, right? I mean, it is. That's the foundation, you know, of the new law. However, you know, there is another side that certainly is, you know, God is a just God, and you know, he held his people accountable in the Mosaic law, and he certainly will us as well. Yeah, Paul.
One last thing, Matthew 5:17. This is Christ speaking. Do not think that I came to destroy the law or the prophets. I did not come to destroy, but to fulfill. Therefore, assuredly I say to you, until heaven and earth pass away, not one jot or tittle will by no means pass from the law until all is fulfilled. So we are accountable, but in a different measure. We have a direct relationship with God. We are not separated by the veil.
Yep.
So Christ came to fulfill the law. We have a responsibility to obey the law. To reiterate what I said before, everything in the law Christ speaks of in the New Testament. And Paul, after the Pentecost, speaks about our conduct, our behavior, and our moral position.
Yeah, it's like we just read in Ephesians, you know, we've broken down in the flesh that dividing wall, you know, that was in the old law. Yes, Jimmy?
Really, when you think of it, Galatians chapter 3 tells us the law was our schoolmaster
Mm-hmm.
to bring us to Christ. Now, the whole Old Testament law is always these types and shadows of what was to come. Like
Yep.
you think of the Passover lamb during the time of the Passover.
Yeah.
That's
The
when
parallel.
God pulled his people out of Egypt. But Jesus is our Passover lamb today.
Absolutely.
That's the way he pulls it out. So the whole New Testament, the Old Testament was just types and shadows of what was to come.
Yep.
And it's important that we know these things.
Yeah, those similarities between how it was structured, right? I mean, it's more than a coincidence.
Yeah, they always said, you know, the blood of bulls and goats can't take away sins, but
Absolutely.
the blood of Christ can.
Right.
And so all that's important that we know that so that we can understand what the Old Testament law is about. It's mostly things that brings us to Christ.
I think one thing, me personally, you know, connection between the Old and New Testament. How often do we talk about, you know, oh man, how bad the world is and how corrupt people are and how much sin there is in the world? And it ain't no different than it was in the Old Testament. I mean, there were parts of it that were worse, right? So, you know, three things that I think we can take. You know, God hasn't changed, right? From the Old Testament to the New Testament, God is God, and He is stable. Man hasn't really changed, right? We're no different than, you know, than these folks that we're reading about, you know, in the Old Testament. And then I think the other piece too that we oftentimes overlook is that the devil and his tactics also have not changed. You know, we often think about, oh man, how hard it is to live in the year 2023 and all of the temptations. And you know, while it's true that things may be more readily accessible, there's nothing new under the sun in 2023 that didn't exist under the Mosaic Law. There's not. Men were just as perverted, just as wicked as we are today.
Yeah, I agree with all of that, except I think the fear and the idea or the mindset that you're doing something wrong has changed.
Yeah, you're right.
So there's no fear of consequences, and there's no, it's just blasphemy really.
And I think that's because there's a disbelief in God, or a partial belief in God, right? There's a belief that, yeah, there's a God and that He loves me, but that's kind of where we stop. He just loves me, right? He's not going to hold me accountable for the things that...
Or there is no God. I see that more.
Yep.
There is no God, so why, you know.
So why do these things? So back to what Jimmy said, you know, the parallels between the Old Testament and the New Testament. Even in the Old Testament predicted its own replacement, right? We see hints of that throughout the Old Testament. Let's flip over to Jeremiah real quick. And let's go to chapter 31. And let's look at 31 through 34.
Say that again, Nick. Jeremiah what?
Jeremiah 31 through 34. And this is about, you know, like Jamie said, one of those really close ties between the Old and New Testament. It reads, "Behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah. Not like the covenant that I made with their fathers on the day when I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt, my covenant that they broke, though I was their husband, declares the Lord. For this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel after those days, declares the Lord. I will put my law within them, and I will write it on their hearts, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. And no longer shall each one teach his neighbor and each his brother, saying, Know the Lord, for they shall all know me, from the least of them to the greatest, declares the Lord. For I will forgive their iniquity, and I will remember their sin no more. So, we go from the blood of bulls and goats to the blood of Christ, right? And I do think it's kind of neat that, the foretelling of the replacement of that covenant is found within, that covenant, right? And we also find authority in the New Testament that shows where it has replaced the Old Testament.
And then can I just mention one thing? So
Yeah.
they didn't understand what that all meant.
They didn't have a clue, right?
But then later on, it gets explained like in Hebrews 8 and 10 and stuff. It gets so that,
Yeah.
I mean, you remember even the apostles and stuff.
Hmm.
They still were clueless even to the end,
Well, they were clueless and they walked with Jesus, right? And heard these things from his mouth.
Like Jimmy's talking about,
Yeah.
those types and shadows.
Yeah.
Like a shadow, like you see, you can
Yeah.
see it, but until it comes into the light,
Yeah.
then, that's what's happening in the New Testament.
Sure.
It comes into the light, and then
Sure.
you see it,
Sure.
So now we have no excuse.
They probably had, you're right, they probably had no idea what that meant when they read it. And I think about the book of Revelation and, the kind of I don't know what's the word I'm looking for. People are hesitant to study the book of Revelation, right? Because, it's scary and it's numbers and colors and, beasts with 4 heads and wings. And, at the end of the day, Revelation is really just a kind of a glimpse behind the curtain for us, and good versus evil, right? And the good wins, right? To your point, Peter, the church that the book of Revelation was written to, they probably didn't understand all of that at the time, but it is neat to look at when you got the big picture, to be able to make the connections, throughout the scriptures. Let's look at Acts 4 real quick. I've got 3 quick scriptures we'll look at on the Old Testament, the New Testament replacing the Old Testament. So let's look at Acts 4, 11 and 12. Who would like to read that one?
This is the stone which was set at naught of you builders, which is become the head of the corner. Neither is there salvation in any other, for there is none other name under heaven given among men whereby we must be saved.
Let's look at Colossians 2, 14 through 17.
You say Colossians?
Colossians 2, yep. 14 through 17.
Having wiped out the handwriting of requirements that was against us, which was contrary to us, and he has taken it out of the way, having nailed it to the cross, having disarmed the principalities and powers, he made a public spectacle of them, triumphing over them.
Perfect. And then one last one, Ephesians 2, 14 and 15.
For he himself is our peace, who has made both one, and has broken down the middle wall of separation, having abolished in his flesh the enmity, that is the law of commandments contained in ordinances, so as to create in himself one new man from the two, thus making peace.
Apologize, I had that one down twice in my notes. We read that one earlier. Okay.
It's okay. That wall of separation is important to talk about in this regard.
Yep.
Because there was a wall of separation at the temple,
Mhm.
right, where the Jews and the Gentiles couldn't cross over that.
Yep.
But that's been broken down now.
Yep.
And in regard to that one flesh, the Jews and we being Gentiles, Jews, we are now, instead of that physical Israel, we are now that spiritual Israel under God, His church, His family.
And
That's a very powerful verse, and that's one that, like I'm saying, you need to understand what that Old Testament wall of separation means.
Yep.
In order to understand what this verse means.
Yep. And we even, we find in the Gospels, right, and, the accounts of, the crucifixion, the physical tearing, of that curtain as well, right? Let's see. Yeah, so in Mark 15, verses 37 through 39, and Jesus uttered a loud cry and breathed his last, and the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. And when the centurion who stood facing him, saw this way he breathed his last, he said, truly this man was the Son of God. What did Tim say a few weeks ago, how thick that curtain was? 4 inches thick? I forget how many men he said it took to hang it up or take it down.
He said a team of horses couldn't.
Yeah.
And heavy.
And, not torn from the floor up, but, from the top, to the bottom, right? Which I think is pretty telling of.
Well, that top part was probably also thicker, right?
Yeah.
Because it's got a hang on there. So you would think if you're going to tear it, you'd probably tear it from the bottom.
Yep. Another parallel between the old and new covenant, and we often talk about the 10 Commandments, right, as kind of being the foundation of the old law. 9 of those 10 are carried over into the New Testament, with the exception of what's the one that's excluded? Sabbath day, right? And we even see that some of them are strengthened and reinforced even more so than they were in the old law. We'll take a look at those 2 that are reinforced a little bit, and then we'll probably run out of time today. Let's look at Matthew 5, 27 and 28, which deals with adultery. Matthew 5, 27 through 28. It says, you have heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery. But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lustful intent has already committed adultery with her in his heart. So again, we take that foundation from the old law, it carries into the new law, and then it's, amped up a little bit, right? So not only the physical act of committing adultery, but if you look at, another man or another woman, you've committed adultery in your heart. And then let's look at Ephesians 4, verse 28. And it says, let the thief no longer steal, but rather let him labor, doing honest work with his own hands, so that he may have something to share with anyone that is in need. So we see, both of those, are clearly part of the 10 Commandments and carry over into the new law. So, all right. So that's kind of a good stopping point before we get into verse 9 and kind of change course just a little bit. So we'll pick up with verse 9 next Sunday morning. I appreciate the comments and the participation. Makes class much more effective, in my opinion. So thank you, guys.